Welcome, everyone. I'm Jared Walton, and joining me today is Joanna Nelius. She's actually one of my former coworkers. We worked together at PC Gamer and Maximum PC. Haven't talked to her in a while. She's now working with Reviewed, the USA Today network. How you doing, Joanna?
I am doing good. How are you doing? I'm so excited to finally get to talk to you after or not just talk but geek out about graphics cards
Hardware.
after about
Excellent.
hardware after we haven't worked together for several years now. But yeah, thank you for
Yeah.
having me. This is
Thanks for
fantastic.
coming on. She tweeted at me and she's like, I need to talk to you about RTX 40. I'm like,
Yeah.
come on my show and let's talk. So we're going to do that. And she colored her hair, but it's not the right shade of, like, it needs to be greener or maybe
No.
redder. Like red would maybe be what most people are thinking now that we've seen Nvidia's prices. So we are here to talk about RTX 40 series, the launch so far, not launch, the announcement, I guess. Prices, painful prices. You've seen my little thumbnail with the wheelbarrow of gold bars or whatever it was.
uh,
Yeah, it's an interesting, like, and we were just talking before we got on the show, like, the specs look really good in some ways, and then, like, all of Nvidia's performance where they're making huge claims, it's like, what about when you don't have DLSS 3? Like,
DLSS.
it's
Or
gonna be,
non ray tracing performance. Yeah,
yeah,
that it seemed a little uncharacteristic of NVIDIA not to include those more specific benchmarks. Kind of like in on the inverse, like when AMD released its most recent cards out, how it didn't spend a lot of time, or the most recent, the 6000 series, because we're expecting more cards. So
right.
let's be specific. The 6000 series. Just remember they didn't spend a whole lot of time talking about actual ray tracing performance because of their architecture. It's not as good as Nvidia's. So usually when these big tech companies leave out something big like that we're all testing, yeah, it's kind of like
Yeah,
you missed all this.
yeah, what's it really mean? And I mean, like, one of the things that's interesting is memory bandwidth interfaces, like, they're not getting bigger, and that's not super surprising. They're adding
Yeah.
more L2 cache to compensate, kind of doing the infinity cache thing, and I'm like, okay, that can work well, but it doesn't universally fix everything. So,
Right.
it's all about hit rates, and it's like, well, if you have a 50% L3 L2 cache hit rate, then it's like that's like 50% more bandwidth. So yeah, that'd be great. But yeah, I don't know if they're holding back because they want the reviewers to be able to be surprised and show some excitement and whatnot. That's possible. It could also be like CPU bottlenecks are a real thing on a 3090 Ti if you're not running ray tracing or
Mhm.
4K resolution. And so it's like one of the interesting things, just kind of skipping ahead, spoiler, they showed Microsoft Flight Simulator, and they're showing like 120 frames per second or some such. Like, it was a big number. I'm like, now hang on, like, Microsoft Flight Simulator doesn't even get above like 70 frames per second on ultra quality at
Mhm.
1080p because your CPU bottlenecked. But then they reveal this whole DLSS 3 thing, and I'm like, oh, they're rendering one frame on the CPU and then doubling it with the GPU. I'm like, so yeah, it's interesting. You get double the frame rate.
Yeah.
How, like, that could feel nice and smooth. It might even look pretty good as well. Like, I don't see it being better than native rendering because DLSS super resolution is still not better than
Native
native
render.
rendering.
Yeah. I mean, you can still see in the very, and I mean, NVIDIA's upscaling tech is better than AMD's in terms of the actual quality of it that's displayed on your monitor. So things that I have seen between DLSS and FSR is that fine mesh screens, like in a window, for example, with FSR, there's more flickering with it because whatever algorithm they're using to upscale, you know, not that open source has more issues than anything else, but there are some quality issues with it. It's not as smooth, whereas DLSS has always been a bit smoother about those fine details. But I always have kind of looked at both technologies as something that is more useful for people who have mid-tier level cards and lower. Like if you have a high-end card, like I would expect it, like you're gonna natively render all this stuff, because why else are you paying all this money, right? Like,
Well, I mean, yes and no. Like I was talking with Gordon and PC World on the Full Nerd yesterday, and I'm like, look, if it's me and a game supports DLSS or FSR2, I will often, because I have a 4K monitor, I will turn on quality mode. I don't go balanced and I don't go performance. Performance, like, and that's what ticks me off about NVIDIA's numbers so far, is they're all with performance mode, the 4x upscaling. And I'm like, well, it's not bad, but
Yeah.
it is not as good as native. It's never even really that close to native. And so I'm like, yeah, that's the
Yeah.
best case scenario for performance, but it's also the worst case scenario for image quality. So, I'm like, I will turn on quality mode in all the games that I play that use it. Cyberpunk, I've got a 3090 in my PC, and I was playing it with DLSS turned on because I was like, yeah, I just want to smooth things out and hopefully not dip below 60 frames per second so much. But yeah, so this is an interesting one. Ruber2, what are gamers? We're making cards for content creators now. Except this was interesting. They didn't pound this point home. Like when the RTX 3090 launched, they're like, oh, it's not for gamers. It's a content creator card. And they drove that point home so many times, and I had to beg them for a card. And they're like, well, you're more of a game reviewer, game performance reviewer, and we really want to focus on content creators. I'm like, I'll run the content creation tests too, and I did.
Yeah.
But I'm just like, I didn't hear the 4090s only for content creators business this time. Like, it is. It will work well in there, I'm sure. But it's a GeForce card, and it's $1,600. So, yeah.
Yep.
Fun times. Let's see.
I completely did not realize that there's comments in the chat. Hi, everyone. Yeah.
Oh yeah, on the right side, of the interface, there's a comments button, and you can click that and see what people are saying. So yeah,
I don't do this very often.
Let's rip off the gamers even more. I mean, like, this is a cynical view, and I get why people are cynical, but NVIDIA's a business, AMD's a business, Intel's a business. These people aren't your friends. They're trying to make money, and they're trying to make as much as they can because of capitalism. Yay! But at the same time, their costs did go up. Like, this is not made up stuff. We had, I don't know how many stories last year. TSMC raises wafer prices. TSMC raises wafer prices again. Like, they said that. There were reports like at least 3 or 4 times of wafer prices going up 6, 10, 15, 20%. And so it's like, well, you compound that, and it's like, N5 was not cheap to start with, and then they raised the prices by perhaps 50% or more. NVIDIA had like billions of dollars of write-off saying, yeah, we had to prepay for wafers last year. Like, that's painful. So, there's a quote from Jensen. I'm flipping over to it because I want to read it right here. Yeah. Gordon actually asked this question in a briefing that all the press were part of yesterday, and his question, I'll read it from him. He says, RTX 4000 is finally here, for which I'm sure you're finally, it feels like a huge launch. But the reaction universally that we're seeing out there is, oh my God, it costs so much money. Is there anything you would like to say to the community regarding pricing on the new generational parts? As well as, can they expect to see better pricing at some point and basically address all the loud screams that I'm seeing everywhere? So Jensen's response, he says, first of all, a 12-inch wafer is a lot more expensive today than it was yesterday. And it's not a little bit more expensive. It is a ton more expensive. Moore's Law is dead. And the ability for Moore's Law to deliver the same performance half the cost every year and a half is over. It's completely over. And so the idea that the chip is going to go down in cost over time, unfortunately, is a story of the past. So, I mean, I get that. He's not lying.
Yeah.
These are all facts. How much did the cost really go up? How much did they have to push that on to the end users? That's the harder part. And of course, NVIDIA, you know, they build the GPU, they ship the memory, PMICs, capacitor. I don't know if they ship capacitors, but they ship a lot of components together with the GPU. That's what you buy if you're formerly EVJ, if you're Asus or Gigabyte or whoever. The board is kind of a either or thing. You can buy a board from NVIDIA or you can roll your own, but NVIDIA has to test it, certify it, like say, yes, it meets our standards. And they give them a bunch of design docs. And so Gigabyte, Asus, MSI, all the big companies, they work from there, and some will build their own board, some will just pay NVIDIA and not do the board work themselves. And then they slap on their own cooler and fan and RGB and call it a day.
Voila. More cards. But yeah, like there's also, I feel like
my mic is producing static.
Oh no.
Why?
I don't hear any static on my end.
I'm going to unplug and plug back in.
Technical difficulties. Pause. Okay, you're muted though, Jared.
Mute. How am I unmuted now?
Yeah, you're unmuted now. You sound fine on my end.
Who said that?
RJ, yeah.
RJ, do I sound okay now, RJ? Someone yell in the chat. I will switch to my problem with broadcast is it works great except when it doesn't, and I've been having this issue where it clips out on me all the time. Maybe because of the way I sound, I don't know. And so all of a sudden you'll miss half the word. Static comes and goes.
You have such a pleasant voice. I don't understand.
Let's see. All right.
All right.
Raise your hand if you don't want me to use broadcast speakers, microphone. What a pain. What a pain.
All right. You good?
We need a better setup. I'm switching to broadcast.
All right. You still sound fine on my end, so.
All right. Tell me if that sounds better in chat. All right. Where were we?
Oh, yeah. Talking of like, so I mean, I think there's a lot of things that are driving up just prices all over the place, right? I mean, we have a massive inflation problem right now. It's not just in the US, it's all over the world. There's still supply chain issues because COVID and everything else, and climate issues around the world. Like, they're messing things up. I always get the letters switched up. TSMC,
yes,
right? Yes,
Taiwan
thank you.
Semiconductor Manufacturing Company.
Yeah, they went through a huge, massive drought not too long ago. So that, of course, is also going to affect their production.
It's going to cause a plague.
Cause a plague, right? It's harder to get raw materials. Those prices are going up as well. So it's everything that goes down to the supply chain. I mean, shipping is more expensive. And I worked in the semiconductor industry for like 5 years on the customer service side. So I got to see a lot as to like what extends lead times and delays stuff and jacks up the prices and everything else, so, it's not total BS blaming weather. It has like, it's documented in the news that TSMC was having issues because they didn't have enough water for their production, right? So it's not all on weather, but I don't agree saying that it's total BS, right?
Right.
So yes, costs are going to go up no matter what, and for NVIDIA, like, all of those cost hikes through all the production process, that gets us to the MSRP where we are right now. But Jared, like you said, how much of that is like actual cost and how much of that is profit for NVIDIA. That is something that we don't know.
Yeah, so
Oh,
JPR.
hey, Hal 9000, please don't be rude. Like, come on, man. Come on.
Yes.
Come on.
Yeah, don't make me mute.
Yeah.
So, and I asked Jensen about this yesterday as well. I said, hey, we heard all this stuff about TSMC. You had to pre-order for GPU supply far in advance.
Mm-hmm.
That cost you money. And I asked, what about the AIB partners, the card partners? Do they have to pre-order further in advance? And he said, no, they don't. Like,
sorry, Jared. Can you kick this guy? Like,
yep.
Thank you.
Please don't be a man. These people. So he's like, lead times extended. He said normal lead times for GPUs are like 4 to 6 months. And he said because of all the shortages and everything, it got to be where it was like a year and a half, sometimes even 2 years out for things. And he's like, so, that's a huge lead time. We're still feeling the impact of that, obviously. So, NVIDIA's prices did go up. How far? We don't know exactly. Yeah. They do. We don't know. He's saying they didn't pass it on to the AIB cards partners, that they ate some of the cost. He gives some reasoning. It's probably not all BS, but you have to take it with a grain of salt, because then you have this deal with EVGA has pulled out of the market. I'm like, maybe they didn't pull out because they were going to lose money on everything, but they were looking at the potential profits and saying, no, like, we're not going to do that. So yeah. It's and crypto on top of it doesn't help things. So it's going to be interesting.
Slim Jim Slim has a comment. When will TSMC's cost hike be seen on AMD, NVIDIA, and Apple? I mean, I think that's a great question. Again, we just don't know the specifics of how much everything costs, right? So.
Oh, here we go.
I'm
looking for the right comment from somebody.
Yeah.
And Apple's all, like, their prices are high, and the new iPhone 14s, they're not cheap, and their chips are a lot smaller than the GPUs we're talking about. And this is maybe a good time to segue into the GPU stuff.
There we go.
Yay! Let's talk architecture. So this is AD102, and I've gone ahead and blown up just the die because I like die shots. So this is just your die shot, and this is an artistic rendering, probably. Like, we know with Ampere that there's this guy called Fritz. I can't remember his last name. He's on Instagram, or no, he's on Flickr. And he does these super high resolution die shots of chips, and he like grinds them down, and it's really cool, and I love that stuff. And he actually has shots that he's taken of the actual die, not an artistic rendering. And if you compare those for like GA102 to the NVIDIA provided GA102, there are definite differences, but they weren't that bad. Hopefully that's more or less the same with AD102. But let's walk through it. So at the high level, we've got the graphics processing clusters, 12 of them. That's, they had 7 GPCs on the GA102. So they've increased that, but I think, no, that's right. 12 times 7 was 84. So then each of those graphics processing clusters has 12 SMs. So these are all these streaming multiprocessors. And I should note that the little in between, so if you look at this slide and you go over to the blank spot in between them, that's still kind of like, I think those are like the texture processing clusters, maybe some of the other stuff. It's not always clear, and it probably doesn't matter too much for just a high level discussion. Memory controllers around the outside, we got 12 GDDR6X 32-bit controllers, and then we've got these big chunks of L2 cache in the center. L2 cache size really jumped. They had 6 megabytes of L2 cache on Ampere's GA102, and now they've got 96 megabytes. So like, that's a huge increase.
Taking a page out of AMD's book, maybe?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then somewhere in here are the ROPs. I think the ROPs might be right below the GPCs. So in between the GPC and the L2 cache, somewhere there's 12 clusters of ROPs with 16 ROPs per cluster. I believe that's the right number. So maximum configuration is 192 ROPs, which is an increase, but it's just linear scaling. All of that's nice and cool. So this is the big chip thing. So a few things to point out. Like, look at all that L2 cache and look at all those memory controllers around the outside. And AMD is taking all of those out of the main GPU chip and sticking them on memory chiplets. And cache and memory interfaces, analog interfaces, are like the two things that scale worse when you shrink a process node. And so they're saying, hey, let's put those on the cheaper, older N6 process, and we'll put all the important stuff on the N5. And the result is their chip is basically half the size of AD102.
Yeah.
And this is also weird to me, is when RTX 30 launched, we had GA102, and that was used in the 3090 and the 3080. And then later it was used in the 3080 Ti and the 3090 Ti and the 3080 12 gigabyte. We had GA104. It was used in the 3070 and the 3060 Ti, and it was later used in the 3070 Ti, and I think they just had a harvested version that got put into like a 3060, but that was like just, hey, we have some of these extra dies, whatever. Anyway, the main point was they had 3 different GPUs for all of the desktop RTX 30 series. GA102, GA104, GA106. GA107 was only for the mobile 3050 and 3050 Ti. They never came to desktop with those. So I'm like, 3 GPUs, and we had 10 different product SKUs from Ampere. Right now we've got 3 products from the 40 series that have been announced, and they're all using a different GPU. And I'm like, is that partly because they're like, I mean, that has to mess things up, because you're like, oh, now we need to know how many AD102, how many AD103, how many AD104 do we order? And obviously AD104 is going to cost less because it's got less memory controllers, less SMs, less cores, less cache, all of those things. Reportedly, at least one rumor says AD104 is around 300 millimeters squared, half the size of this big chip. And that's the chip that's going into the 4080 12 gigabyte. So it's like they can make a smaller chip, but it's then not as fast. So
yeah. Can't fit as much stuff on it.
Yeah.
Simplistic terms.
Yep. So it's interesting that we've got all this stuff. And ultimately we've got their product announcement. I want to find the right slide before I skip ahead. Where's that slide that I wanted to show? Dang it. I have, oh, no, that's not it. I have one that shows the pricing stack, and that's useful.
It could be useful later on.
Did I not include it? Oh, sorry. Where's my, yes. Anyway, their slide that shows the product stack, they still show the 3080 on there at $699. I'm like, wow, who's as bad as $900 for a 4080 12 gigabyte feels like? How's that going to play into the whole lineup with the 3080? Like, I wouldn't buy a 3080 right now for $700 for sure.
No, don't. I ended up like 2 weeks ago, I got a 3080 Ti for including tax, $730.
Yeah,
because it was on sale. Like, massive. Like,
you upgraded to 3080 Ti right before the new stuff launched?
Yep.
Oh.
Because cheaper, and maybe this is a good way.
2 years of waiting.
2 years of waiting. I got a 3080 Ti, and you know what? I'm set for a while. And maybe this is a good segue to get like deeper into like the other specs and the performance too, because there is a method to my madness.
All right, so let's see. These are NVIDIA's slides now. So sprinkle your salt liberally. So this is their big claims. Full ray tracing. They've got new RT core, new shader cores, new tensor cores, shader execution reordering, which is part of the shader core, and DLSS 3. That's all, great sounding. This was also pretty interesting to me. They said, in Battlefield 5, I wondered for the past 4 years since we've had RTX cards, I was like, how many rays are actually being cast? Because at the time of the RTX 20 series launch, Jensen's up there going, yeah, we can do 11 giga rays per second. I'm like, okay, 11 billion rays per second. What does that actually mean? And I was like running the math. I'm like, but are they really doing, and how many rays are needed per pixel? So here's what they said. Battlefield 5, which only did ray traced reflections, was doing about 39 rays per ray operations per pixel. They're saying the new Cyberpunk 2077, this is with the RT overdrive setting. So this is not the existing RT Ultra. This is even more ray tracing. They're up to basically, what is that, like 13 times more ray tracing operations per pixel.
It goes what, like Ultra and then Psycho, and then now it's that? Or
yeah, I believe so. So RT Overdrive is not yet out, is my understanding. Anyone in chat think that's wrong? Let me know. I haven't looked for it lately.
I've been on that game. I haven't seen it, so it's not. Yeah, it's not there
it's
yet.
Coming. I believe it's coming with DLSS 3 is really what they're doing, because they're like, hey, look, we're going to crank up the ray tracing and we're going to turn on DLSS 3. So, all right, and this is a shot of it. Like, that definitely doesn't look like the Cyberpunk 2770 I remember playing.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
That's a lot of reflections. Looks cool.
It's gorgeous, like undeniably gorgeous. And like part of me, I'm like, okay, I just want to take a 4090 for a test drive just so I can run through Night City in photo mode. Like, I think that's
Johnny Silverhand's still a butthead.
He's still a butthead. Always a butthead. Yeah.
All right. So, back to the architecture. Streaming multiprocessor. They've already said this. We've looked at the die shot. This is their block diagram. So, and this is where it's interesting, because, like on paper, a lot of these gains are huge, going from 84 SMs to 144 maximum. So the RTX 3090 Ti had all 84s. Like, this is basically the 3090 Ti on Ampere. Ada, we do not have a fully enabled AD102 announced yet, because the RTX 4090 has 128 of the SMs enabled. And so that was one of those weird things where I'm like, you're announcing 3 different GPUs and they're all harvested GPUs. Your big monolithic die sizes are obviously, they play into yields. Down the road, we'll get higher yield versions. There's probably also lower yield versions that they'll, down bin. Clock speeds, that's a decent bump, 25-30%. But then memory interface is the same, 384 bits. And memory speed, I don't think, went up as well. They have not revealed officially memory speeds. The leaks that had all of the rest of the specs, however, say they're sticking at 21 gigabits per second for the 4090 versus the 3090 Ti. So, and they switched from Samsung's 8N to TSMC 4N. Obviously, that's a big cost. Still a similar size chip. We've got 628 millimeters squared versus 608 millimeters squared. And I did the math. I looked at a wafer calculator, and what that means is on Ampere GA102, they could get maybe 90, something in that ballpark, chips per wafer. With the AD102, they can get about 88. So they lost a couple of chips per wafer. So, like, it's not like they gained a lot. They gained like 2% fewer or more chips per wafer by the slightly smaller die, and then yields still come into play. So
that's probably why it costs a little more too. Like, I mean, again, going back to the whole, like, there's so many little things that like go into the final price of something. It is,
This is actually the only official information on the L2 cache so far. Is that giant block in the center. They have not said it's 96 megabytes, but again, the leak said 16 megabytes per memory, 8 megabytes per memory controller, times 12.
Yeah.
So I assume they're probably correct. Grains of salt again. That performance curve, that probably uses DLSS 3, which is, that's going to be a problem throughout all of the performance claims made by NVIDIA right now. If you turn on DLSS 3 in performance mode and do 4x upscaling plus a repeated frame, which we'll get to later, like you can get a huge boost in performance per watt. What will it look like if you don't have those things? Probably a lot closer to the ampere line, just like the ampere is close to Turing.
Which, to add to that, today, PC Mag published an article by Michael Kahn, headline, NVIDIA's 4x performance gains for RTX 4000 GPUs deflate without DLSS. And then subheader, a benchmark from the company shows that performance gains become more muted if the PC game doesn't support NVIDIA's DLSS technology. And I mean, I think we can kind of also extrapolate that, not just if it doesn't support it, but if it does and you just don't have it turned on. Yeah. And I mean, the article is pulling up like that up to 4x performance chart that, we saw during the briefing, but it didn't give specific frame rates. It just gave relative performance. And again, I believe the performance on there was just ray tracing performance. But the reason why I think it's probably going to be a little bit closer is because of the memory interface width. For example, when I, tested the 3060 Ti and regular 3060, when those came out, you had a higher boost clock on the 3060, lower one on the Ti. The 3060 had more video memory than the Ti version, but it had only 192-bit bus versus the 256 one from the Ti. And it's that memory interface width that choked the 3060. And at the time, if you went by MSRP prices, that Ti was only about $50 more, and you're getting much better performance because of that wider memory bus. If we look at that spec on the 40 series, so if we look at the 12 gig VRAM version of the 4080, which is the lower one in their current stack, it also has 192-bit bus. So it's like you have a faster boost clock, but like that, just like the previous version. Yeah, yay, thank you.
I found those specs. Don't have prices. Oh,
yeah.
they have prices there, but they didn't show the 3080. Yeah,
right.
So,
it's the performance is going to be relative, and most likely that not that much of a gain over the previous gen. So this PC Mag article, like, to me, that totally tracks.
Yeah, because if you're doing, frame generation? That's their word for it. You're generating a frame wholly out of the DLSS 3 optical flow accelerator and the inputs that it had. You double your frame rate, and what's cool is it doubles it even in CPU bound situations. So if Flight Simulator only runs at 60 frames per second, now like it's not going to get 120 because it won't be a straight doubling, but it can be in the hundred frames per second range. What's interesting looking at these specs on the two 480 cards, so 20% roughly faster performance, so 40 to 49 shader teraflops, right? But the power, like 285 and 320, like that doesn't seem like the power is that different. It's 12% more power on the 16 gigabyte, which is, that's kind of surprising to me, because I would have thought that the 20% faster plus the extra GDDR6X memory would have been more of a power difference. So It is higher clocks on the 12 gigabyte card, I believe, right? But we'll have to see how this.
Yeah, I can tell you that clocks on the 12 gigabyte card, 2.61 boost clock.
Versus
Whereas
2.51.
51. Yeah. Again, between those two cards, it's going to be the same, or not exactly the same, but I suspect, just looking at these numbers, it's going to be a similar issue between that 3060 Ti and the regular 3060. I'm most curious to see what the lower end 4080, its performance compared to, like, let's say the 3080 Ti, for instance, how that is all going to shake out. Especially since you can get the 3080 Ti on sale for less than what the 12 gig 4080 is going to cost. So,
Yeah,
right,
so let me see for a second. This is, I just need to get my slides straight. 33, I think, is the one we want. So this is the NVIDIA's performance. And this is funny, too, because, like, you look at that bottom row. So the right side is next generation, which means DLSS 3 and lots of ray tracing. Like, you can, let's just ignore that because that's where they got their 4x increase from. But then you look at the left-hand side, and they're showing these charts. But look at the last three. How often do you play Arnold in Maya or V-Ray or Octane Renderer? Like, those are awesome games, aren't they?
Oh, they're so good. I hear they're fantastic. They're a little hard to get into first and learn the whole system. But no, I mean, I don't test those unless I'm doing a specific, like, content creator focused test. We don't test those for gaming performance. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they had a slide the previous day that didn't show those, and then they added them, and I'm like, well, it is kind of interesting, but look at the gains there. Now, ray tracing performance, because that's what Maya and V-Ray and Octane are going to hit. And it's like, okay, so it looks like, based on this, that the 4080 12 gigabyte is anywhere from maybe 5% to 20% faster than a 3090 Ti. And so it's like, okay, it does get some gains in ray tracing, but then you look at the games and it's like, okay, Warhammer Darktide and Microsoft Flight Simulator, those are both DLSS 3 enabled for this chart. And then the first three games do not have DLSS at all. Wait, actually, they took
Resident
one
Evil
out.
Village
Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Had Division 2 in the... it's the fourth one. Yeah. So the third one, Spider-Man Remastered, does have DLSS 2. So if you look at Resident Evil Village, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and The Division 2, those are traditional non-DLSS, non-upscaling performance. And you can see they're saying the 4080 12 gigabyte will match the 3090 Ti. Here's the question, and we'll find out in 2 weeks, basically, is, are these cherry-picked because they made the 4080 look better? Are they cherry-picked because they made it look worse and they want to surprise us? Unlikely. Are they just, maybe I'm sure NVIDIA has run dozens of game benchmarks. So the fact that they're showing those three games, I'm like, why those three? Why not others? I don't know. But it's something to consider. Three of those, Resident Evil Village, Valhalla, and Division 2, are AMD promoted games originally. They've been around long enough now that maybe that doesn't matter as much.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to rip off your point of these being cherry-picked, I mean, look at Racer RTX. That's an NVIDIA, like, proprietary thing. Nobody's going out and, like, playing that. So what, that benchmark?
I thought they're going to make that a game you can play, right?
Oh, are they? I got really confused. I'm like, I don't know what this is. As a reviewer, we're not running benchmarks on that. So why is this here? I don't know.
I'm not sure on that either. So, like, I've seen they've had variations of this Racer thing demonstrated before, usually talking about Omniverse. They're in the cloud, professional rendering, all this other stuff. Like, are they making it into a demo or an actual game that we can play?
Right.
I'm still not sure on that. Maybe the information's out there, and
Does it have anything to do with, like, cloud streaming or anything like that? Like,
yeah.
Like, at this point, this is like, if you have a good internet connection and you're looking at the 40 series prices and you're going, no way, just go get a GeForce Now account. Like, I promise you, good internet, like, it's the best game
It's a lot
streaming
cheaper.
service. And it's a lot cheaper. Yeah, it just kind of makes it makes more sense if you want like 60 if let me word this correctly. Like, if you have an older machine and you want to push more frames, but you don't want to spend all that money on it, you don't want to buy a 40 series, like the 30 series cards are basically all sold out because they're on sale and they're getting rid of inventory. Like, just try
What's
it.
GeForce Now cost per month?
There are 3 tiers now. So there is still the free tier, which is a great way to just kind of try it out to see if it works with your location and, you know, the
But the
bandwidth
free tier is
thing.
like very different. Like the hardware
Yes.
is, it's like a 2060, I think.
It's like a 2060. Yeah. So you're just going to be doing like very basic, like 1080p streamed gaming.
Yeah.
The next tier up, I want to say, is closer to like $10 a month. That you're getting like the equivalent of like
2080, I think.
a 2080 in there. You also get longer access to stay on the servers. So like, compared to the free tier, you have like an hour before they kick you off and put you back in the queue. But with the second tier, you can stay on longer before they kick you off. And then of course there's
Is it 4 hours or what's the time limit?
I think it's 6, but I may be
Okay.
getting that confused with the newest
They
tier,
might
which is-
both tiers
Yeah.
might be 6 hours,
yeah,
which is a long time to play. So
it is a long time, but you get priority access. And then if you have the top tier one, which is the RTX 3080 tier, I mean, you get ray tracing in 4K, like you get like surround sound features, like you get so much more with it.
and it's $20
Yeah.
a month basically, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, you think about that and you're like, wow, $20 a month. But then at the same time, it's like, well, $900, like that's a lot of months.
Yeah, and then, you know,
So-
if you just want to play these games, like you buy them, like you link your GeForce Now account with your Steam Epic account, GOG account,
Yeah.
like whatever, and then you get to keep your games. So it's not like Stadia where if they go under. But yeah, like it just. Anyways, we're moving.
We've
So far
gotten a
away
little
from
off
it, but
track. It's
yeah.
funny because I've used, like, I've gone on business trips, not recently because of COVID and stuff, but I remember back in like 2019, I had a GeForce Now account and I was over in New York or somewhere, and I was in the hotel and I'm like, yeah, let's give this a shot. And thankfully the hotel had good internet, which is not actually even remotely guaranteed in my experience. But yeah, like I had my laptop that had a crappy Intel GPU in it, so it couldn't play any games, and I was streaming. I can't remember what game I was streaming, but it was something that was at least moderately difficult.
Yeah.
Um,
And just to answer another question, another point in the chat. Yeah, there are a lot of games that will not play on GeForce Now, but the list of compatible games that they have is by and far the biggest compared to any other game streaming service, other than if you're gonna, you know, get a
Yeah, it's
subscription.
better than Stadia.
Way better than Stadia. You know, it's still better than PlayStation Now. It's still better than xCloud. It's still better than Luna. Its only kind of big competitor is Shadow, which they have come out of bankruptcy and they're kicking back up, which is you're paying like, I think, a base $30 a month or more for an entire virtual PC, which you can game on. But yeah.
Okay, so if you need a cheaper way to get into PC gaming and you still have the hardware, I mean, I don't know. A lot of our people are probably already gamers, so they have good stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an option. All right, we'll go back to architecture. These are all the new things they talked about. I think I've got a couple of slides coming up next that talks about these displaced micro meshes and opacity masks, and those are actually pretty cool sounding. Shader execution reorder, I've talked about a little bit in the past. Basically, you run similar shader codes on the same SM. NVIDIA says it's like out of execution for CPU, helps improve throughput. They actually showed this. 44% improvements with Cyberpunk, 29% with Portal, 20% with Racer. Those are all RTX enabled though, like meaning ray tracing games. And they actually said at one point that shader execution reordering is really important for ray tracing because like your rays can, you hit this pixel and it bounces this way and gets one shader, and you hit the pixel next to it and it might bounce in a different direction and get a completely different shader. And if you did the traditional rendering pipeline approach without the shader reordering, then you can get two completely different shader workloads trying to run at the same time in an SM, and they get it ends up with gaps in your executions, and so you lose performance. So I don't know how much SER is going to help outside of ray tracing games. Like, I think they said 25% somewhere, but I'm like, well, you're showing ray tracing games, and this looks like, if I do a rough math average, we're looking at like 30%. So I don't know. Anyway,
can we all just agree though that Portal with ray tracing looks incredible? Like,
I'm so excited for that.
I cannot
the ray
wait
tracing
to play it
cake
with ray
is not a lie.
Yeah. I mean, if this new method, this restructuring, the architectural changes, right? I mean, at the end of the day, like, if it at least like does make ray tracing with DLSS off, that's the caveat. If it does make it better, then that's really cool. And there's AMD is still gonna have to play like catch up with it, because the one major thing that has kept me from buying an AMD graphics card is because the ray tracing is pretty weak at the moment.
Well, the interesting with I've said this before, I think, on the show, but AMD's ray tracing, the triangle intersections, ray triangle intersections, that doesn't seem to be too bad. Their ray box intersections for the bounding volume hierarchy seems to be more of a problem, which interestingly brings up the next thing that NVIDIA talked about. Yes, displaced micromessages. So this is a way of optimizing BVH stuff. So they're saying, hey, instead of having this super high polygon count thing that you're seeing in the orangey red section, look to the left of that and you see those lower polygon counts. That's what displaced micromeshes can do. So you pass the BVH structure gets, a far less complex BVH, but it also gets the triangle displacement map, which already it doesn't already exist, but it shouldn't be too hard for the developers to do it, because those displacement maps are used for tessellation and things like that. Well, so the third generation RT Core can take that directly, uses less memory bandwidth, generates the BVH faster. I think they showed, so they showed some examples here. They're saying like 11-to-1 compression ratio, 28-to-1 compression ratio. Those are all cool sounding. My big question was, I'm like, well, that kind of sounds like it might work without developer work, like meaning that it's all in the hardware, and it's not. It requires developers to go and use DMM, and I'm like, oh, great. So how many games are going to use it? Simply Gone and Adobe gave a shout out to it, so it might get used, but it's not a guarantee. So that made me sad. Opacity micromass speeds up ray tracing work with transparent objects. So they gave this example of the Portal RTX, and they said, you look at this, the triangles look pretty simple on this, because you're like, oh, it's a flat water surface, flat walls, whatever. But then they said, but if you look at all those transparent things, make the ray tracing seem far more complex, and then opacity micromaps, they can make things go a lot faster. But again, game developers need to support it, so I'm like, suck.
So
which going back to shader execution reordering, this is in the hardware, it's baked in, you can't even turn it off. So I'm like, that's great, because everyone gets the boost. It's like NVIDIA's Turing, when they said, hey, we've got concurrent floating point and imager, and you couldn't disable that, but they said we feel like you could get 30% better performance in games because of our concurrent FP and int. We couldn't actually prove that, but we did see decent performance from it. Ampere took that up a level, and now shader execution reordering is another similar pipeline improvement, where they're saying, they can show us gains because they've got the drivers, and I guess they can turn it on or off, but end users will just have it always on. All right. Then we get to DLSS stuff. So 23 frames per second native. You use super resolution 4x upscaling and you get 62. And then you add in all this stuff for DLSS 3. And I guess it's time to talk DLSS 3.
Yeah.
Which, again, I think it sounds like really cool technology. If it were used everywhere and it were guaranteed to be available in every game, it would be like infinitely more exciting. But
I think it will be at some point. I mean, if we go by, the whole thing, Moore's law is dead, well, there's going to be a finite amount that we're going to be able to do, like with a physical chip. So that, I mean, all of this AI stuff that not just AMD and NVIDIA are doing on the graphics side of things, but it's being done on the processor side of things. It's being done on other types of software, right? So this, I have a feeling, is going to be the way of the future for a while, is improving what a physical card can do with algorithms, because we're
better
not
software instead of better hardware.
Hardware becomes Moore's law is dead, so no more.
So it's and NVIDIA has been investing heavily into AI for several years now, or a decade or whatever it is. So this optical flow accelerator, this is what makes DLSS 3 require an RTX 40 series. One of the slides I think I'll get to later says that is actually like a 320 teraops processor, or it's some big number. Like, it's not using just the tensor cores, it's a separate processor. So they're saying it generates the optical flow field, and then that feeds into this deal where, let's see, do I have it? Oh, the specs. There was my pricing thing. Where's my deal? I'll come back to these slides. Don't worry. There we go. So this is what they're doing with DLSS 3. They generate they render frame 1 at 1080p and upscale. Then they generate, based on that, an intermediate frame. Then they render frame 2, and you flip back and forth between actual rendered and upscaled versus just generated using their optical flow accelerator. And they no, that's what I want to say. Wait, that's not the right image. Dang it, my slides are not in the order I wanted. Sorry guys, I'll come back to those too.
Graphics cards, complicated stuff.
Yeah, I was rushing to try and get this ready. So this is interesting too. Like, when you consider what they're doing with DLSS 3, I'm like, well, yeah, no wonder your performance skyrockets. You're rendering a 1080p image and displaying 2 4K frames from it. Like, that's 8 times the pixels that you actually rendered. So if you can make that work right, it's going to give you a massive boost to performance. Let's see. I want to skip to like slide 49. That's where I need to go, which isn't too far ahead. So they showed this and they said, okay, here's your 3 frames. Obviously it's not in motion. We're looking at 3 separate frames. And the question is, can you tell which ones were generated by the optical flow accelerator and which ones weren't? And the answer, and obviously you're looking at a live stream, so the quality's probably getting munged anyway. But if you're looking at the native thing, you could pixel peep and you'd probably just go like, I don't really know. And that's a good thing. If you can't spot the differences easily, that's a good thing. And the answer, they said, was that the first one and the third one were generated frames, whereas the second one, the middle one, was your rendered frame. Same thing again, this time with Racer RTX, and you look at them and you can go cross-eyed or whatever you want. Can you tell which one? And I don't know, is the car moving really that fast? Yeah, it is. Okay, I'm looking at the tire and I'm like, yeah, you can see the line goes past.
Kind of moving. Oh yeah, you can.
And so it's moving, and you look at them, and they said in this one, the first and the third were actual rendered, and the second one in the middle is your optical flow. So that's kind of cool. And then,
but yeah, I could not tell the difference. But again, when you're looking at it streaming over over a video chat or like this, it's a lot different than seeing the frames like with your own eyes. So
Yeah. So
but,
I get what they're going for, and of course the thing is, I'm like, if you can't tell the difference with your eyes in motion, that's probably good enough. And so again, I'm like, hey, I'll turn on DLSS, I'll turn on FSR, I'll turn on XESS, whatever it is. And NVIDIA actually does also talk about their Streamline API, which is supposed to make it so that a developer plugs in Streamline, and then Streamline gives them access to DLSS 2, heck, DLSS 1 if you want to do the old crappy version. DLSS 3 has been added. XESS is on board. There's already, I guess, support for it, or there will be when you've got the hardware. It's open source, or it's open enough that someone can create an FSR2, FSR1 plugin. It hasn't been done, but I think it could be done. So, in theory, that's the best for the game developers. You support one API, Streamline, and there's no royalties for using it or whatever, and then you can add all the upscaling options and the user gets to choose. So, yeah, that would be great. Will we see that? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, thank you, Chat 69. No. We don't want bots in here. No.
I meant to hit block and I forgot, but that's good enough. Okay. They're in timeout. All right. Let's talk about the card quickly. So the PCB looks basically the same as the 3090 PCB. They've got this little wedge cut out, but they do have the new Gen 5 power connector. Woohoo! Which is the only thing I think is good is like the 3080 and the 3090. They had that. It was actually like oriented like this to the plane of the board, and I was like, yeah, that just didn't seem that secure. I never broke it, but it just gave me a little concern. This looks like it'll be more secure. 23 phase power delivery, more compact PCB that allows air to flow through. The power transient, though, this is important because people are like, hey, it's 450 watts, but how bad can it get?
Yeah.
And they show a 3090 versus a 4090, and they say they've done a lot of work to make the power transients better. And so you can see, like, right when you start running the workload, performance and current are a little higher, and then it settles in pretty quickly and basically stays right at that, like, pretty much in a narrow range. But if you look over at the 3090, you've got these spikes and valleys happening, and that's not as good. Hopefully that means, if you have a decent power supply already, you can just use the 3 8-pin to single 16-pin adapters. I guess the adapters are actually to 12-pin because they don't give you the 4 cents pins, right? So
right, yeah. It's the same, their own little proprietary pin thing this time around. Again, and it was like one of those things where like NVIDIA's the first mover. Like they created 12-pin as an interim because they're like, hey, we want the higher power connector now. And so they did that 2 years ago, and we didn't really need it, but so much. Still don't need it now, but...
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing is the problem will be if you want to go beyond 450 watts, which if the reference card is 450 watts, there will be 500, 600 watt factory overclocked cards, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't know if the gains in performance will be big enough to warrant or to justify doing it. Probably not, but they'll probably be there. So I'll see if I can test some in the next couple weeks. The card itself, the actual physical dimensions of the 4090 compared to the 3090 Founders Edition, they're almost the same, except that the fan is bigger. The card is like 4 millimeters thicker, but also 1 centimeter less long. It's shorter.
So still a brick, a little brick.
I mean, the 3090 the 3090 Founders Edition, every time I grab it, I'm like, this is such a heavy card. and I've got other 3090 Ti cards that I've picked up, and they're heavy, but they're like more like 1.8 kilograms, whereas the Founders Edition is 2.2 kilograms. And like, it's not going to break your arm or anything. But my thought is, if you've got one of these sitting inside your PC, and your card is like horizontally located, then I'm gonna grab this.
You definitely want to like have some sort of support on that thing, so it doesn't. Yeah.
This MSI included this with their Supreme X, and so my test bed that you see glowing over my shoulder here, I have one of those in there for every time I put in like a 3090 or 4090 when it comes out, or a, you know, any of the big heavy cards. I'm like, yeah, these are good. EVGA had their lasso something that was supposed to support their heavy cards.
Mm-hmm.
Like, heavy cards aren't a good thing on your PCB, on your motherboard PCB and PCI slot. So
nope. As we kind of saw in that one, I don't know if anybody has seen this going around Twitter, but like the big ol' like 40 series in the mini ITX board, and the guy's just kind of holding it, and then it falls out. It's like, what did you think was gonna happen?
He was just holding the card, and the board fell off, or what?
He had it must have been at least a 4090, but like it was attached into the mini ITX board, and then he was holding the entire thing by the board itself, and then the card fell out.
What, it was a 4090 though, because he shouldn't have a 4090.
Or maybe it was a 4080. I'm not entirely sure.
No, I'm saying like he actually had one of the new cards though, because I don't have my card yet. How's he getting the card? Dang,
I don't know. Go on my Twitter. I made a post about
so the graphics card drops out and hits the floor, basically.
Hits the floor, table, whatever it was. Yeah, I made a post about Asus made a promotional picture of one of the giant cards attached into one of the teeny tiny motherboards.
I've seen that.
And then somebody on my thread beneath that posted that video, and I'm like, no, why would you? No.
So I test a lot of graphics cards. Here, quick. Mm-hmm. That's my job, right? Those are all like most of the past several generations of GPU.
Puts my collection to shame.
Sometimes those cards end up sitting on a table, just because I tested one and I pulled it out and I'm testing the next one, right? Mm. And I have dropped a couple of cards over the years. Or actually, earlier this year, my cat knocked one of my cards off the table, and I was not happy about that. It still worked, thankfully, but I did totally bend the I/O plate on one of them because it landed on it. So it's like, yeah. I don't know. Like, are you a fan of mini ITX? Like, I just think if you're buying a big graphics card, I think it's stupid to put it in mini ITX.
Oh, yeah. I would never put it in with the mini ITX. I would go mid tier with the graphics card. Like,
I think when we lost blowers as the predominant cooling option, mini ITX became far less suitable because, I mean, like, even if half of the airflow got vented out, which is kind of what's supposed to happen with the Founders Edition cards, like the 3090 anyway, like there's still a lot of heat that gets dumped into the cases. And if you've ever run a 3090 and you put your hand on the back plate, like that metal is hot. And now imagine that being in 1/4 the area, the space, less airflow. I don't.
Disclaimer: don't actually touch it. You will burn. You will burn yourself.
We've cooked eggs on them. Yes.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
back in the good old days. All right, I'm flipping through some other slides. We already looked at performance. This was their 1440p, 360 FPS stuff. So I guess those monitors are coming now.
These were the only like non-ray tracing benchmarks we got, but I don't know if these had DLSS on.
I'm looking at their footnotes and it says Reflex plus Boost is on, but it doesn't mention DLSS. So so that's good. I mean, you know, they're hitting frame rate caps of 300 FPS, 600 FPS in Fortnite. Clearly not turning on ray tracing in Fortnite there. Overwatch, Did they say they bumped it to 400 FPS?
They
or
said
did they bump it to 600?
bump it to 600.
Yeah.
I don't
So
know.
Overwatch 2.
Overwatch 2. Yeah.
Where's Boverwatch when we need him? we used to work with Bo Moore at Maximum PC Gamer. I think he's at IGN now, but
He's at IGN, yeah.
he loved playing Overwatch, and he was like also the Overwatch coverage, and so his nickname became Boverwatch.
Hi, Bo.
Simple, easy integration. Everyone should do it. I talked about Streamline before. Honestly, if you're doing temporal AA, I believe that uses most of the same things as DLSS and FSR2.
Mm-hmm.
You need color buffer. Your color buffer just means your frame. Depth buffer it's the Z buffer. It shows how the objects are ordered, which helps with the rendering to optimize some things, because you can determine, hey, like this is behind this, so don't render it, whatever. Motion vectors is something that's the hard part. This is why FSR2, DLSS, they sometimes have ghosting or errors, is because if your motion vectors don't get everything right, then you can get some artifacts. And then of course you got your output buffers. I don't even know why they include that. Like, that's the frame that you put out on the display. So the only thing that's changed with DLSS 3, games that want to implement it would also need to implement reflex, because they're trying to reduce latency. And this is an interesting question, because I was trying to figure out, I still haven't gotten a good answer on this. Where's that? This thing. So you render, upscale, generate, render, upscale, generate, but that generated frame, like if you're turning the screen and say you moved between frames 1 and 3, that your view has skewed 50 pixels to the right. So halfway between that is 25 pixels. I'm like, how do you fill in those 25 pixels on the left side of the frame that haven't been generated yet? And I don't know what they're doing. Like, it would be easy if you had frames 1 and 3 and you're trying to interpolate between them. But if you don't have both of those, how do you interpolate and get a good view?
Yeah.
And that's part of the magic of DLSS 3. Because if you have frames 1 and 3, that means you're adding 2 frames of latency for the generated frames, and that would be bad. So they're talking about latency. They're talking about generating frames. They're doing something funky there. I don't know exactly how they're doing it, but that's something to...
Yeah, I'm not sure how they're doing that either, but I'm assuming it must have to work in a very specific way with reflex. So
reflex reduces latency to basically make things smoother. It's supported on all NVIDIA GeForce cards for the past 10 years almost. I guess that's 8 years for the 900 series.
Yeah.
But it's not supported on AMD. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
More benchmarks. This was their DLSS 3, So basically any of the games that are shown here, you're like, okay, so these are DLSS 3, and that means that we don't know what non-DLSS 3 games are doing.
Oh, yeah, it says, I mean, they try to give us it, right? It says like native, but they don't put in a specific number, but at least on the chart they have it all grayed in.
Yeah.
So we just have to use our brains to estimate that. But I mean, if that is the native performance without it, it's like, how much of an improvement is that really over the 30 series?
Yeah, so it would have been interesting if they had had a DLSS 2 line as well, right?
Yeah.
Strangely missing.
Ooh,
I mean, probably halfway between is a fair bet, or something like that.
Well, that's why I cannot wait to test to see the
4X.
difference.
Up to 4X, Joanna. Come on.
Up to 4X. Up to is the key qualifier.
Most of the time it won't be, yes. So these are 35 games, over 35 games and apps are coming. Software, hardware. Oh, this is, I mean, yeah, so here it is, the optical flow accelerator, 305 teraops per second. So I don't know if that means they're doing int 8. It's weird because when they talk floating point 16-bit or higher, FP32, FP16, then they say flops. but when they talk integer operations, they talk tops. But they also have started calling FP8 as tops. So floating point 8-bit, it's FP8 is a weird thing that they've only just created, and it's good for AI, I guess. I like that's what they're saying.
Yeah.
Is this using FP8 or Int8 or something else? We don't know. Google uses TeraOps for their tensor processing units, their TPUs. So
Right.
as far as I understand it, Google is mostly doing Int8. So there's a lot of AI stuff that doesn't need the precision of even FP16. But the fourth generation tensor core is at 1.4 petaflops. That is not FP16. That is FP8. Just FYI. So it's still a lot of petaflops, and you'd still get like 700 teraflops of FP16. But if you look at the RTX 3090 Ti, its teraflops was 320. So
You see,
that's what I've got. So
doubled specs too.
Double the FP16 performance basically of the 3090 Ti.
Yeah.
And double it again if you use FP8. They were talking about, I think this is DLSS or is this Reflex?
System latency pipeline. They're just talking, This
is DLSS 3. So they're saying this is how it normally works with DLSS 3. They reduce CPU back pressure because they're generating every other frame. I don't know. I'm like, we'll just skip by that. And I think that's, this was kind of cool. So they were showing, because when you think about the frame generation, so you've got these motion vectors, and that's what the red box is trying to show, and like, hey, this piece of data moved in this direction, right? And then they said, but the problem is, what about shadows? Because the shadow sits on top of the road, and they actually had an animated video on the right here, which they don't have. And it totally flickers because the motion vectors are like, the road's moving, but the shadow's not. So the optical flow accelerator, the whole point is to help them, I guess, with figuring these things out in the hardware so that it can actually recognize the shadow and realize that the shadow's not moving and somehow flow those together and generate an accurate intermediate frame. So,
it was like they needed to kind of like make it recognize that the shadow is actually an extension of what is moving. So it all needs to be moving at the same time. Otherwise, you get this like very, very like super quick flickering thing like that.
Yeah, it's like every other frame, the shadow was bouncing back and forth because the generated frame without this optical flow stuff was it would grab onto the road and go, I guess the shadow moved, and then it bounced back because it render properly. And so it's almost like you need to render it but still ray trace it, but you can't because you're just generating the whole frame out of previous information. So I mean, like, when you think about what they're doing with this optical flow business, it's super complex. And if they make it work like they're saying they do, I'm like, man, it's super impressive. And no wonder it needs a 305, where was that, teraops per second optical flow accelerator.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of data to keep track of, like, and calculations, and
that's a big number cruncher. That's basically all of the processing power of the tensor cores on an RTX 3090 Ti. I lost my slide.
That was pretty cool. I mean,
was there anything else? We saw that. I think so then they showed this CPU limited performance, right? So basically, does it say what CPU they tested on? They said 12900K, which seems kind of slow at 51 FPS, but maybe that's because it's a big cityscape. And because the CPU only has to generate one frame instead of two, they basically were doubling their frame rate with Flight Simulator. Flight Simulator is like the perfect CPU-bound game for people that want something that's CPU-bound instead of GPU-bound. Even at 4K on a fast card like a 3090 Ti, you're still running into CPU limits. Then they showed, Cyberpunk, and that was about it. I think that's it.
Yep. So, to surmise, lots
Yeah.
more
So
questions, which we won't have the answers to until we get these cards
yeah.
and we review them.
So here's the question now: is like, how bad are these prices? And should you buy one? Should you wait to buy one? You know, what do you do if you need a card now? Like, what you just bought a 3080 Ti, so you're set. You're
Yeah,
not
I just
upgrading.
bought a 3080 Ti
For how much
MSI
did you say?
for 730, and that was after tax. Like,
Yeah.
I got a great deal at Best Buy, and it's an MSI triple fan as well, and it comes overclocked.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I got it for less than MSRP of the 3080 when it first came
Yep.
out. So I'm like, I'm happy with this. Let's just get
Yeah.
it now because these are all gonna go. But yeah, your question.
And
of,
I think what you'll find is, I think in the next 2 months, you will see like that deal you paid will probably become pretty much the baseline, because no
Yeah.
one's going to spend $800 on a 3080 Ti when there's a 4080 for $100 more.
Yeah.
But you know, my thought also is like, who's buying a $1,600 or even a $1,200 graphics card? It's a hobby, right? PC gaming is a hobby for a lot of people. We're older. We have jobs that can support our expensive hobbies if we
Yes.
need to. But you know, the people who are college students or just don't have as much disposable income, whatever your situation is, I'm like, yeah, you're not even looking at a $1,600 card. It's well, I drive a minivan and I've got a 2005 Honda Civic, so cars clearly aren't my priority.
Yep.
And so if I look at a sports car and I go, hey, that's looking really sweet, that $250,000 Tesla or Ferrari or whatever it is, you know,
The big shiny thing that goes vroom. Yeah.
the thing that I'm not going to buy. For most people, like, what do you buy right now? The answer is really like the best card for your money if you can't spend a lot. $230, $240 gets you an RX 6600. You don't get as good of ray tracing performance as NVIDIA. You don't get DLSS support. We'll see if FSR2 support picks up enough to make that less of a concern. But
But
for
you get higher frame
$230,
rate.
yeah, for $230, the 6600 is here. I'll tell you. I can punch it in. So the 6600 is about what's the 2060 is actually about the same price now.
Yeah.
Maybe the 2060 might even be $10 cheaper, but the 6600 is on average about 20 to 25% faster. You know, so that's, you know, I'm like, well, if you want NVIDIA, conversely, the 2060 is the way to go. And that's funny because people are like, oh, but it only has 6 gig of RAM and it's slower and on and on. And I'm like, yeah, but it's still a lot faster than like a 1660 Super. So like the 2060 versus the 1660 Super is 20% faster. You know, so I'm like, hey, it does only have 6 gig of RAM still. And if you could find a 2060 Super for the same price, that would be a better card. But it's funny because I guess there aren't 2060 Supers and 2070s and 2070 Supers and all the other 20 series. They're all basically discontinued.
Yeah.
Except for the 2060 is still available.
It's still going.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's still like, if you're on a very, very tight budget, it's still, if you can find like a certified refurbished card, for instance, like looking at my benchmark tests, like Far Cry 6 1080p Ultra, you're gonna average 81 frames a second still, you know.
And that's plenty fast.
That's plenty fast. I mean, Total War Warhammer 3, their benchmarks are much harder, more taxing on the system than Warhammer 2. You're going to average like 50 frames a second at 1080p Ultra. Going down the line here, 93 frames, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. So
yeah, a 2060 can basically play any game out there, and usually at 1080p ultra, and it's like, and if you have to drop to 1080p high, like, oh my goodness, the world is ending because you can't see the difference anyway.
Yeah.
So Slim 420, he says you can mod FSR 2.1 support into any game that uses DLSS. I haven't seen that actually. That's news to me, but I have seen people trying to mod FSR in before. Like, again, I really hope we can get away from having to do any shenanigans, and that we'll just get developers who say we're going to put in both because they take the same inputs.
Yeah.
So like really you put in the algorithm and you say, hey, if it's DLSS, we'll feed it these inputs. If it's FSR, we'll feed it the same inputs. So it should be like less than a few days work to get everything working. FSR 2.1 also addresses some of the image quality issues that actually NVIDIA raised with FSR2. They're like, oh, but look at this thing that's broken FSR2 and look at this thing. And so AMD's like, they maybe were aware of it. They were working on fixing it, but now it's fixed. They showed some things where they're like, yeah, look at Farming Simulator with FSR2 versus FSR 2.1. And they've got their ghosting and other artifacts mostly under control now.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense that you should be able to mod it because my understanding is FSR is open source. So
yeah. I think, like, wasn't there something about replacing DLLs so that you just like somehow renamed your FSR DLL into the DLSS DLL? I don't know if that's accurate.
There's so many things going on. I feel like in some ways, like, PC gaming has gotten easier just in terms of like building your rig over the years, but when it comes to like actually digging into the nitty-gritty of the hardware, it's far more complicated than it even was like 5 years ago. I feel like.
Yeah, so this is the other thing. If you want to buy one of the new cards at this stage, I'm like, we know NVIDIA's pricing, we know what they've said about performance, but that's all we know. By the time they launch on October 12th for the 4090 at $1,600, all we know is that the 4080 is coming in November. AMD is going to announce, like NVIDIA did 2 days ago, they're going to announce the RDNA 3 GPUs on November 3rd. Probably 2 to 3 weeks after that is when cards will become available. That's the question, is how much and how fast. That's why we run the benchmarks, right? But I'm like, do you buy it now instead of waiting 3 weeks to see what the competition can do? I think that's, you'd either have to be so diehard NVIDIA fan that you just don't want to consider AMD. Yeah. And I know there's a lot. We used to work at PC Gamer, and not to throw them under the bus, but how many of our gaming editors had AMD cards? Goose egg.
Zero.
I asked once, and I was shocked because I was like, hey, who has an AMD card besides me? And it was like crickets. I'm like, wait, are you guys all using NVIDIA? And they're all like, yeah, they're the best, right? And I was like, well, there's nuances here. Like, some of you should use AMD, right? And they're like, nah. And I just laughed. And I know there's gamers that are definitely like that. They're like, I don't care what AMD's got. I'm going to use NVIDIA. So I guess if you're one of those, if you're one of those, go right ahead.
I always look at it as like, especially now with the new generations that are coming out, and I will caveat this and say my opinion might change as soon as I test the new generations and see what they are capable of, right? But as of this moment in time, if you place a greater preference on ray tracing, go NVIDIA. If you place a greater preference on like just pure raw frame rate count, and you love to play like esports, first person shooters, MOBAs, all that good stuff, go AMD, because they have more of a focus in that area versus NVIDIA, who their kind of secondary focus is not so much another segment of the gaming community, but the content creators. And that's also true. Like, if you're a content creator, depending on what kind of content you're making, you can get away with both, but you might want to go NVIDIA, for hardware acceleration and all that good stuff.
Yeah. So the interesting thing, like, based on what NVIDIA has announced now and their pricing, and looking at what we know of the architecture, assuming the rumors that we're hearing about RDNA 3 are correct. So instead of a 608 millimeter square latest TSMC process chip, we're looking at potentially 308 millimeter squared plus 6 memory controller dies that are made on the previous generation. It's N6, but it's really 7 nanometer.
Yeah.
It's just it's a marketing update. I don't know. But what I've heard is that N5 is basically twice as expensive as N6 and 7. And so that means that half of the chip that AMD produces, or half of the graphics card that AMD produces, is going to use chiplets made on the half as expensive process node. Like, that's going to reduce their costs a lot. And it's really smart for AMD to do this because, like I said earlier, cache and memory interfaces are the things that scale the worst when you're doing process node shrinks. So, let me go back to this. So all the blue stuff on the outside, all the pink stuff in the center, AMD pulls those out and sticks them on their MCDs, and like we could legitimately have RX 7900 XT maybe priced like, I don't think they're going to be our saviors. They're not going to be like, oh, we're going to do a $500. No, it'll probably be $1,000, but it will, if they sell it at $1,000, it will be because they think they can beat, generally speaking, the $1,200 card. Maybe even keep pace with the $1,600 4090. So that's what I want to see from AMD. I don't know if we'll actually get that, but that's the hope, right? And what do they do with their lower cards? Because now they've got this GCD that is 300 millimeters squared. That's not that big. But then they can say, hey, let's make a 7800 XT with only 5 MCDs. And we'll still have 80 megabytes of infinity cache. We'll still have a 320-bit memory interface. Like, it should be a reasonable trade-off. And they also have a harvested chip where they're like, hey, not every chip is going to be fully enabled, so we disable some of the compute units and we slap on a little bit less memory and we get a little bit less performance, but we can sell it for cheaper. So hopefully AMD keeps with this, like 7800 XT at like $700 or $650 would be great, and then go down from there. Yeah. Will scalpers hit us hard this time? Now that when I say, you bought your 3080 Ti for $730, I think that price will become fairly common in the next 2 months. Maybe even go lower. I think 3080. I think it'll go lower for
I was about to say Black Friday.
3080 Black Friday, like the last 2 Black Fridays have sucked for graphics cards.
And just PC components in general. Yeah. Like the chip shortage and everything.
I think this Black Friday we try and make up for that because we'll finally have we'll have oversupply, and all the retail outlets are going to be like, we got to clear all the RTX 30 series at least above a certain level. Like maybe they'll keep the 3060, 3050 around, but they want to get rid of all the 3070s and above, 3060 Ti and above. And also the RX 6000, the 60s, probably 6700 and above. I think the $250 cards, we're not going to see new stuff that soon. Like it's probably 6 to 8 months out. But the $400 and above, like they got to clear those out and make way. And so we could see 3080s going for $500 or so. We could see 3070s going for $400 or less. And so if you haven't bought a new graphics card in several years and you were waiting the past 2 years of crypto mining and COVID, now you might actually have a chance. And there's maybe 20 million graphics cards that we're mining that are going to hit the used market. And so
be careful with careful with that.
Yeah, don't buy a used card unless it's somewhere that you can definitely return it, and even then be cautious. But I mean, if someone offers up a 3080 on eBay for $300, say, like, if you know enough to replace thermal pads, buy the card, test it. If it works fine, you probably got a working card, because miners didn't want to kill their cards, right? They were making money off of them, so it's like they weren't trying to kill them. And so worst case, like maybe they replaced the fans and replaced the thermal pads and it kept it running. They did undervolt because, you know, you didn't need the high GPU clocks for Ethereum. You just needed memory bandwidth.
Yeah.
So there's potential to get a mining card that's actually still fairly serviceable. I wouldn't do it if you're a neophyte to computer hardware though. So
no.
Just don't hand over cash for a used card for sure. Don't pay in cryptocurrency, because if you give them their money, the money, they're gone and you'll probably get a lemon. But if it's on eBay, like I've sold stuff on eBay where I was sure it worked, not necessarily even graphics cards, but other stuff, right? And I had someone say, like, I actually sold my own FX 8350 PC. So this
wow.
is like 8 years ago, 7 years ago. I sold it to someone and they said, this is broken, blah, blah, blah. And they filed a claim against me and I had to take it back. I got it back and like they had installed a CPU cooler on it because there was thermal paste on it and it wasn't there when I sent it. Like all this crap. I'm like, you totally, like, this is your own dang fault.
You destroyed it. Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
man.
They bent pins on the processor. I unbent them and the system still worked. I'm like, they're full of crap. They ruined my own system and I had to take it back. Well, if you buy a used card off eBay and it doesn't work, like, you file a complaint and eBay will generally debit your account and send them their money whether you want it or want them to or not. That's my experience anyway. So don't buy from China, don't buy any crazy stuff. But if you have a US based person who's been an eBay member for 5 years and they're trying to sell their used card, they're probably actually legitimately, you know, I know people who have 3080s and 3090s who they're like, I am selling and I'm buying a 4090. So there are real people selling cards that they're perfectly serviceable.
Yeah,
so,
that did not come from a mining rig. So
yeah, and there's still 20 million mining GPUs that are probably going to go up for sale, hopefully, and flood the market, and it will be a good time to buy a GPU soon. Or now. I don't know. She just bought one, so I've seen
sales on 3070s for like $400 already. So it's this like, how low can we go type thing moving into the holidays.
Yep. And there's incentives, like retail outlets are sometimes like, hey, we'll get people to come in the doors and hopefully they'll buy other stuff, so we'll actually lose money, you know, or they just say we got to clear out warehouse space. So, you know, let's see. Yep, this is my take. Used mining cards aren't all bad. They're mostly underrolled and in great condition. I mean, I know someone who did mining, and I helped them refurbish his. It was a Gigabyte 3080 card that he's like, man, this thing, like, it used to do 95 mega hash. This was like 3 months ago, and he's like, it's only doing like 70 now. What's going on? And I looked, I'm like, well, your memory's at 110C. So we pulled it apart. We bought thermal pads. The old thermal pads didn't even look bad, but they just sucked. And so I put on some thermal rights, I think, and it dropped his temperatures on his memory like 20C.
That was a massive drop.
Yeah. When mining, I should say. When gaming, he's like, well, it worked okay gaming, but he was mining. So anyway. It's a bad joke. I need to read this quote too. This is another fun one. Let me find it. So someone asked in one of the briefings yesterday, they said, there's also the question of why the RTX 4080 12 gigabyte isn't just called the 4070. And so someone said, what was the thought process behind calling the 12 gigabyte chip a 4080 instead of a 4070, especially since it's a different chip?
You see me bouncing. This is so funny.
Yeah. So NVIDIA's Justin Walker, he's their senior director of product management, and he's also the guy who said how great the Founders Edition cooling was on the 30 series when, frankly, their memory cooling was not great. It was barely serviceable for gaming. Anyway, he says, the 4080 12 gigabyte is a really high performance GPU. It delivers performance considerably faster than a 3080 12 gig, like 3 times faster. It's faster than a 3090 Ti. And we really think it's deserving of an 80 class product name. And I'm like, bull crap. I mean, like, sorry, Justin, but like, that is such a marketing answer. I'm like, your new chip, your new architecture is faster than your existing chip. Well, duh. It would be horrible if it wasn't.
Yeah.
The 3070 was faster than a 2080 Ti in general, or at least matched it. The 2070 was faster than a 1080 Ti, or at least generally matched
Yeah.
it. It was close, right? I'm like, so your 4070 should be generally faster than at least a 3080 Ti, which is only 10% slower than a 3090 Ti. I'm like, this isn't like it's. I feel like they called it a 4080 because they wanted to charge more and they knew that they have a ton of 3080 and 3090 cards to sell.
Yep. As if they had called it the 4070 and people saw that price, they'd be
they'd
more
be pissed.
even more mad than everybody is kind of like now.
Yeah, and I mean, like we have the what slide number was that? 3028. Okay. Let me show this again. So these are their specs. We've got 3 GPUs, 80, 104, 103, 102. I fully expect that RTX 4070 will probably still be 80, 104. And it might even still be 12 gigabytes of memory. They could either do a 320-bit interface and 10 gig.
Yeah.
Or, and I would actually be happier, much happier, NVIDIA, please listen to this, if you did 12 gigabytes of GDDR6, 18 gigabits per second. Don't do GDDR6X. Give us the same capacity but a slower memory speed. I think that would be a reasonable trade-off. And then, cut down your CUDA cores and your SMs and everything 15% or 20% or whatever is reasonable. But
right.
I don't think doing less than 12 gigabytes on a 70 series card for the next generation is going to do them any favors. It's not that 12 gigabytes and above is absolutely required. A 3080 with 10 gigabytes still runs like almost everything just fine. The edge cases, it's like, okay, turn your textures down a notch, turn something down a notch, like do something to get under 10 gigabytes of VRAM use. It can be done, and the loss in image fidelity is far more placebo than real.
Right.
But still, AMD's not going to do a 7700 with less memory than the 6700, so they have to look at that, and we'll see what happens with AMD and NVIDIA's lower tier products in the coming months. But I think that's where we'll see like a 4070 probably will be priced at the 3070 Ti mark of $600. And they can bring that price down over time, just like we're seeing now finally happening now that Ethereum mining is dead. It's been a long show. Any questions over here that we have to answer? Let's see. This is a good one. If you've got a micro center nearby, keep an eye out. Yep.
I was at a micro center recently in Tustin, California. Their shelves are stocked, fully stocked. Also, if you haven't been there since the remodel, it's a hell of a lot better, especially the PC gaming section. So I don't know if that's the same deal with all of their other stores around the US, but the one in Tustin, California, got a really nice remodel. So it's pretty cool.
Well, here's a good question. Matthew Anderson, should I consider a water-cooled GPU if I get the 4090? I want a quiet GPU. I hate noise. I go either way. Like, the reality is, pardon me.
You are pardoned.
This fat honker from Asus, this is their 3090 Ti. It's triple slots wide. It weighs almost 2 kilograms. It's a big honking card. It's not very loud. That's the thing is like if you stick a massive heat sink and heat pipes on with air cooling, like the only thing water cooling gets you is you route that out to a 240 millimeter cooler, and I'm like, well, this thing's almost as big as a 240 millimeter cooler already.
Yeah.
I do like this. This is the thing I do like with water cooled cards, the idea that you can bolt that big heavy radiator onto the case somewhere, and then it's not sagging on your PCI Express slot. I had an old system where the PCIe slot did wear out, and well, partly that's because I swap in GPUs every day. But anyway, water cooling, like you do have to plan around it. Like even the AIOs, like it's one of those things where you have to have a good place to stick the radiator. You have to know, is it 240 millimeter or is it 140 millimeter or 120 millimeter? You know, how's the tubing going to work? I kind of personally hate testing them, and that's because I swap GPUs so often that big radiator and tubing and everything just gets in my way, and I'm like, and it usually doesn't even help that much. Like it helps.
Yeah.
It does run cooler. So anyway.
And also to add to, like, you know, I'm sure you've ran into the same thing as well, like testing all of these cards, even the higher end ones. Like I've seen temperatures not rise above like 70 degrees Celsius before. So it's like how much cooling is a water cooler going to actually do? Or it seems like you don't even like need it, at least for this.
I'm trying to remember which
3070s.
Asus model I tested. I had an Asus card that it was their Strix LC.
Oh, okay.
LC for liquid cooling. I think it was a 3080 Ti.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing is, I had another card. I had another card that basically had higher clocks, even though it wasn't liquid cooled. And when I ran the hard thing was, where do you measure noise levels? Because now the Strix card had a fan on it still, but then the radiator that's elsewhere has two fans on it, and you're like, oh, well, where's the accurate place to try and measure noise levels? Ultimately, is like to my ear, the liquid cooler didn't sound louder, but it also didn't sound quieter. So I was like, well, it cost $150 more, and so if you're looking for a cool looking card with a big radiator on it, I'm like, yeah, that's fine, but I don't think it really boosts your performance all that much. Like good liquid cooling is really advantageous if you're pushing heavier overclocks, and most factory overclocks are not going to do that. Like I think even today, if you look at Asus's Strix cards, their liquid cooled cards are actually clocked slower than their non-liquid cooled Strix cards of the same model.
Huh. Okay.
I know, it's fun. It's crazy.
What? Confused face. Okay.
Yeah, so like they bin things and everything else, but I don't know if there's a reason why I'm like, shouldn't your best chips go into the liquid cooled card? But maybe they're also going, well, they don't sell as many of them. That would be my guess, is they certainly wouldn't sell as many of them. Let's see, what do we got? I'm selling when the 70 series drops. Yeah. And this is the thing too, is like if you bought a 3090 or a 3080 or a 3080 Ti, you know, it sounds expensive to pay $1,200 or $1,600 or whatever, but I know people who they bought the 2080 Ti when it was $1,200, and they're like, hey, I don't regret it. And when the 3090 came out, they sold it for like $600, and they were like, yeah, I'll eat that, and I'll pay the $900, and I'll get the new hotness. And then of course the 3090 went out of stock and it sucked. But like selling off your old card and buying a new one isn't a bad thing. It's a way to usually cover half the original cost, at least recover. How much weaker will the actually 4070 be? We don't know.
I don't know.
We guess 20%. That's super accurate. Let's see. Any other things do you see anything that needs answering?
I don't see anything. I'm looking.
I mean, the one thing that I often come back to is like the $1,600 for 4090. That's a whole PC.
Yeah.
So if you've got the money and this is your hobby, and you like, I know people who spend thousands of dollars. My dad got into Pinewood Derby racing as an 80-year-old, Joanna.
Oh God, I want to ask, what is Pinewood Derby racing? But this is probably a conversation for another day, because we've been going for a while here.
It was a Boy Scouts thing, a Cub Scouts thing.
Oh, okay.
Little wooden cards made out of pine wood with wheels. There's adult Pinewood Derby racing things. My dad, he bought wheel sets, 4 little plastic wheels for $100. He had dozens of these things. Like he did it for about 10 years. So I guess it was from about like 72 to 82. Then he stopped doing it again.
Oh
But
wow.
he probably spent $10,000 or more on Pinewood Derbies. And he
Is
used
it
to
is it
travel
the same
around.
as soapbox
No, no, no.
derby?
They're like this big. They run them down little
Oh.
tracks.
Oh my
So
god.
So
Okay.
yeah, like people spend money on what they like. Some people are audiophiles and they have $20,000 sound systems. Some people like cars. Some people, they do remote controlled airplanes that like models or airplane models. Like some models cost hundreds or thousands of dollars. Like if that's your thing, that's your jam, and you want to spend the money on it and you have it, I'm okay with it. Should people spend $1,600 on the 4090? No, probably not. It's only for the wealthy who it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Or like if you're just a gamer and you play games for fun, I'd be looking at console prices and saying that's how much I'll spend on a graphics card. So $500. That'll get you a good GPU.
Yeah.
In a couple months, it'll probably get you a 3080. And guess what? The 3080 10 gigabyte is still way faster than what's in the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X.
Yep.
So, you don't have to spend $1,000, and you probably shouldn't.
Exactly. Plus $1,600, that's gonna get you a really kick-ass like
Yeah. Buy a Zen
mid-tier.
4.
Yeah.
What Ryzen 7 7600X maybe. Actually, I don't know. Maybe it's time to go Raptor Lake still. They're doing well. Get the Core i5 Raptor Lake. Get a new motherboard. Get some DDR5 memory. Get a 4070 or a 7700 or whatever that mid-tier product is, and for $1,600 you'd have a killer system. And that's, you don't need 4K at 100 frames per second, especially if you don't have a 4K 144 hertz monitor.
Dude, if you're spending 4K on a computer and for whatever reason you're only doing 100 frames per second, no, what?
The other flip side is if research professors need rendering deep learning on a 4090, absolutely.
True.
So,
Yeah.
If you're doing deep learning research, hey, those tensor cores, they are probably right up your alley. And, NVIDIA is definitely using gamers to help support deep learning research.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a bad thing. Like, we've got some really cool stuff that is already coming out of AI. I mean, every time you use Hey Siri or OK Google or any of those things, shut up Siri. Those are all AI driven, and they're getting better and better. Like the things that you can do with your phone. I used to use Dragon Naturally Speaking on my PC, and it wasn't very responsive, but it did some decent voice recognition. And it's like now I talk to my phone and they do cloud-based,
Yeah.
text to speech or speech to text. But like it's definitely not perfect, but it's really accurate. And so all these AI things are huge and cool and stuff.
Yeah.
So
Stuff for like AutoCAD too, like any really sort of big, intensive
Yeah.
engineering program. My brother's an engineer, so he's constantly running those very hardware intensive programs.
Ruru 3090 Ti was a 2000. Well, it's not a month ago. It came down fast, Ruru 2. Like, it launched in end of March at 2000. By June, I was seeing them on sale for like 1,700. And then
There was some that just sold for like a little over $1,000.
yeah, they're now
Yeah.
the Founders Edition at Best Buy is this is why EVGA was pissed. Because the Founders Edition 3090 Ti is $1,100 at Best Buy, and Nvidia dropped that price without telling their partners in advance. And so all of a sudden, like EVGA, MSI, all these cards at Best Buy are going like, "Whoa, what the fudge? Why is your card $900 below your MSRP?" And Nvidia's like, "Well, we had to. No one was buying it. Like, it never would have been a $2,000 card without cryptocurrency." And then when cryptocurrency started really failing to keep the prices up, they had to react. And now Ethereum's totally stopped mining, so there's nothing supporting it on the mining front, and basically they're like, yeah, now it probably would have been a $1,200 card if the pandemic and cryptocurrency had never happened, but
Yeah.
they did. So
They did.
all right. We've been on for almost 2 hours, people. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for
thank you,
coming,
guys.
Joanna.
Thank you for having me. It was wonderful. It was fun.
Shout outs to USA Today.
Thank you. Yeah, review. Thank you.
We've got 3 weeks until the crazy review times hit.
Oh, I'm already in it. I'm already in it.
Oh, are you doing CPUs?
I cannot confirm nor deny.
Well, we know Ryzen launches on the 27th. I'm saying, do you review personally CPUs?
Oh, do I personally review
Or are
them?
you
Yes.
like you have? So you're half. Oh man.
Mhm.
So I did that.
I'm you when you were at PC Gamer. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And I'm editing, but like this is like my main focus, and I absolutely love it. So it's my
It's fun, but it's stressful, right?
It is, yeah.
Like you know what the worst time at PC Gamer was for me? It was AMD's best time, and it was horrific because they launched Zen 2, the Ryzen 3000, and they launched the RX 5000 all on July 7th. And I was like going, what are you expecting? Like, I had 3 CPUs and 3 graphics cards all at the same time, and I actually was on a family vacation.
That's right. And you sent me the graphics cards, and then you sent Bo the processors, and then we were running benchies for you, and then
I'm texting you guys, and like, oh, Bo was like, something's going wrong. I'm like, hey, welcome to testing an unreleased CPU product on an early motherboard. It's great times.
Yep. Like, Jared, these benchmark, these benchmark, is this a right benchmark? And then you're like, that looks a little weird.
Yep, those were So I'm very happy to mostly be graphics cards these days. Let me just say that. Anyway, we will be back next week. Let's see, next week it's going to be the 29th. So we'll talk about Zen 4, I'm sure. I'll have on Paul. Maybe we can get some other people, and we'll talk about the new Ryzen processors. Have a great weekend coming up, and if you're looking to upgrade your PC, finally, after 2 years of crap shortages and high prices and all that stuff, we should have, like, this looks to be the best buying season for building a PC that we've seen in a while. It's the manufacturers saying, hey, businesses aren't buying and upgrading PCs. They're hurting. They need to lower prices to sell this stuff, and that does good for the enthusiasts who want to upgrade. We'll see you all next week. Have a good one.